Welcome to the Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly podcast featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from fresh perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 277, Space for Grace. And now your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Hello and welcome to the Authentic Spiritual Journey. My name is Cynthia Alice Anderson. I'm also lovingly known as RCA. I'm the host and I'm here today in 818 Studios with my producer.
Good morning, everybody. This is Dave Croft and welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Spiritual Journey. As always, we love and we cherish being one of the first voices you hear in the week. I hope that you are doing well and thank you for joining us today.
Yes, friends, today is going to be a great day, and I am excited about the show. Dave and I had a lengthy meeting beforehand. We covered all sorts of topics, so he and I are good to go.
Yeah, well, I had to refill my coffee. I made it through one whole cup.
Yeah, that was intense. Well, and we've gotten a lot of nice comments, too, from our live show, and that was such a lot of fun. I want to lift up Lineage, our local sponsor for that, and I'm already looking at locations for the next one, so, we'll see. Yeah. I've been wanting to do one at Lineage for a long time, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and as the audio engineer in me, kind of was like, all this sound, but I don't know, I loved it. From everything from the little scooter gang, that kind of drove by in the middle of the recording,
right.
to getting questions from the audience, to them, making drinks in the background. I just think it's the whole point of going into a venue.
Exactly. It's called Real Life.
That's right.
It's called Real Life, and it's Authentic Life, and that is exactly the name of the show, Authentic Spiritual Journey.
That's right.
And I've also heard from some faith leaders and other faiths besides Unity. One is Lutheran, another is a Methodist, and they've been getting a lot out of our show, and that means a lot to me because it means that we're impacting not only them as individuals, but their congregations. So even when our numbers are over 200,000 for downloads, what we know is you could easily double that number or even triple that number in terms of the amount of people that are getting touched by the show and by these teachings. So that excites me a great deal. And we love to do shout outs. We're grateful. We're blessed that all over the world you're listening. And as I've mentioned a few times, I got reignited my own excitement. I was like, oh yeah, we really are reaching the world. It's sometimes hard to know when you're sitting at home in your studio recording.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to, I'll tell you, I'll give you a riddle, see if you can guess.
Okay.
What's round on the ends, but high in the middle?
Round on the ends, but high in the middle. I don't know. What is that, Dave?
Ohio. So a big shout out to our friends listening to...
That's a good dad joke.
Yeah, I remember hearing that in elementary school. Shout out to our friends listening to us from Toledo.
Toledo.
What is good, Toledo?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I just heard from somebody, strangely enough, a former member of mine, from many years ago, she just gave the talk at Unity in Toledo. So I probably know who that is listening. So bless you, friends, and bless your family and that community that you're serving now. It's amazing. I was just listening to her talk, and only because I got interrupted, I did not get it finished, but it sounded great. And I love hearing from people that have come through my congregation or been one of my ministers that I've mentored. One time I had like 11 students under me at CCU, and boy, those people have gone out and are really impacting many, many people. So that touches my heart. So anyway, Toledo, bless you. And to our listeners in Toledo, we're going to be lifting you up all day today.
Yes, absolutely.
So Dave, give us the talk I'd say the talk title.
Hey, it's all good.
It's just show, whatever.
Today's episode is Space for Grace. Space for Grace.
Well, yes. Friends, I'm going to give you, I feel like I'm going to just talk to you like my buddy right now and say, sometimes in Unity, I get tired of all the same topics. Like, I love talking about release and prosperity. I love talking about forgiveness because those are major. I love talking about meditation, but you know what? we never talk about grace. We never talk about grace. And I myself am in need of grace. And I love to be a receiver of grace. I love to be a giver of grace. And I'm not sure that I have ever done a show on grace. Yeah. It's like so much of my work is about moving forward and setting goals. And I love all that. I love it. And grace is inherent in literally every part of our lives, and certainly every part of the spiritual journey. It's one of those things that we forget is there. When I talked about grace in the past, I've often said something like, it's been when I'm teaching about the law of cause and effect. And I say, what you hold in your mind and whatever you do, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I'm talking about it in that way. And then I say, but grace is inherent in the law. In other words, something comes to meet us. Something is acting on our behalf. And so what is grace? Well, the Bible has a lot to say about grace. Everything from Jesus dying on the cross to God's favor. And so I did quite a bit of research because I had a talk at Unity North Tampa about it with the same title. And I was interested in, where did this idea come from? I love looking up, the beginnings of words, the etymology of words, and even how words get translated and things like that. I find that endlessly fascinating because of what they mean today. And I looked up the Greek, and I looked up the Aramaic, and which was the language of Jesus. And even though the New Testament was written in Greek, and I even looked up the Hebrew as well. But basically, what grace means is a favor. It means leaning toward, basically. And so in our culture, what I've noticed is that, and I always like to bring in the larger culture because I don't see a lot of grace happening right now. And the only way I hear it talked about is some of us are quote unquote blessed and highly favored, right? And Dave, I'm sure you've heard that. You've heard it probably in the church. It's a statement a lot in a more fundamentalist religions. I've heard it in white church and black church, that we are blessed and highly favored. Well, what about everybody else? Well, the scriptures say that it rains on the just and the unjust, right? That grace is always available. And the greatest story of grace I know in the Bible really is when Jesus speaks to the thief on the cross. He wasn't baptized. He didn't dress right. He'd done nothing right in his life, but he simply had a belief. And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. So as I'm applying it to modern day, like how do I operate in grace in my daily life? Because I'm like anybody else. I have things I want to do. I have things I want to accomplish. I have a career. I'm a mom. I have a very full life. I have things to buy. I take care of my home. I have all the human things everybody has. And that said, what is driving me is my spiritual journey. And so it's like, I know how important grace is to me to receive it. It's like, well, what is it? And what is it to me personally? Because I've studied the Bible my whole life. Grace is throughout. The Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament, is full of stories of God's grace, say, to the Israelites. God's favor on the Israelites. But as I think about it today, in my own life, what is grace? Well, grace is making room and holding space for another person. Like maybe even when I want to react, like especially then, it's grace. And it's almost an extravagant kind of love. It's like love with room in it. It's a inner spaciousness for another. And I found it hard to totally identify because it's really an energy and a feeling nature. But if I have somebody say that I love, or maybe it's my child or a family member, and they're doing something that I disagree with, or they're saying something that's less than positive, what I may want to do is react when, and that may even be what they quote unquote deserve. But when I can hold that reaction and create this inner spaciousness for myself and for them, it's like I'm holding space. It's like, for me, grace is the space between the feeling and the reaction, and choosing not to react. To me, that's grace. To me, that's grace. It's helping someone that doesn't necessarily deserve it. Grace is, yes, an action, but it's also an energy. So for me, grace is making room and holding space for another. I really learned about grace when I was working in a long-term care facility. It was short-term. It was for my chaplain residency in the hospital that I did. We had different units, and I was in cancer unit for a while, and I was in memory care for a while. It's like several months in each unit, and I did the ER and ICU, So I was in long-term care, and one of the things I learned is that there are a large number of individuals in long-term care that cannot really communicate. And what I noticed is if they can't communicate, the staff end up treating them a little bit like non-people. They go in, they check their vitals, they real quick, and then they're out of the room. Well, when you're a minister in pastoral care with long-term care, that would be abusive to do, to just go in and say, oh, they can't communicate, and go out. So I would often spend time praying or standing by the bedside or sending energy, or, just waiting if they were trying to tell me something. Well, there was a gentleman one time, and I had read his chart, and it said that he was non-communicative. I think that was the language. And what I noticed is, as I sat with him by the bed, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, and he kind of mumbled a little bit. And I thought, I feel like he's trying to tell me something. And so I waited and waited and waited. And amazingly, 30 minutes later, I was still there, and he said a full and complete sentence. And I found out later he had Parkinson's, and evidently that is an aspect of Parkinson's. And so as a minister, I wasn't trained about disease and, the impacts, but my soul, my spirit was so telling me to just wait. And so me giving this man a few moments of grace opened me up to a whole new relationship and understanding of him, a whole new understanding of me being present, a whole new understanding even of the disease itself, and how people are minimized when we can't just sit and have grace for them. It was just, I thought, well, what else am I supposed to be doing? I'm here to minister, so do it. I had to kind of talk to myself as I was waiting, like, where's he going with this? And then I would go into a prayer, and then I would sit in silence. So this idea of grace has a real impact on the people around us. It has a real impact on us when we do it. I mean, that's the other thing, is that I've certainly been a receiver of someone else's grace, and I can't tell you what it's meant. It's like this, it's been miraculous. And to give it is equally miraculous, because it's like you find a different aspect of your heart. It's a heart and soul experience. It's not an experience of the mind. And it's a little bit of a discipline too, if you're thinking about grace, because everything in our world says react, be right, shut down, cancel it. If you don't agree, shut it off. So it is one of the reasons I think that this idea came up to me for me to talk about, because grace really is a tremendous act of love. And in truth, every single day we're receiving God's grace. Every time we breathe, that's the grace of God, in my opinion. Right? So we're all receiving God's grace. Every time I have a negative thought and it doesn't instantly manifest, we should be giving thanks for God's grace, because we do live in a cause and effect universe. But as I say, grace is inherent in the law. Right? So, yeah. So think about that for a moment. Am I being a bringer of grace into my life and in the world? How, when I'm bringing grace to myself, how it looks is not overreacting if I don't meet a self-made goal or wish for myself. I'm in a process now of getting some of my materials out into the corporate world. And I'm not in a hurry to do it necessarily, because I know there's a divine timing to things, and I love all my spiritual work. I also know that in the corporate world, if I could bring some of these teachings about intentionality, about compassion, about every person has value, about how to, navigate through change, that those things in and of themselves are innately spiritual. And it's amazing, because what I've noticed is if people that I talk to in the corporate world are already spiritual, they hear spirit in it. And if they're not yet spiritual, they go, I want to know more about this. And it kind of catapults them into a spiritual journey. So it's really cool to be able to do it. So that said, I've done some speaking and I'd like to do more. Well, as I do that, I have to create these materials. And creating these materials has taken a great deal of time and energy. It's taken working with somebody who's an expert in the field to give me recommendations for how to, roll out my products. And in my work, I have discovered that I have to be intentional, but I also have to have grace for myself, because I want to force it. I want to push it. I want to make it happen. And I have to dial that back and say, well, what am I in a hurry about? There's no hurry. And so just being in self-love, self-forgiveness, self-compassion, when just because I have an idea, it doesn't happen instantly. So sometimes I'm giving myself grace because of the high expectations I set for myself. It's like, it's all right. So having grace for oneself is a miraculous experience, because what most of us learned is when we don't do what we want in the time that we want is that we're somehow a failure. And so that's what I mean about grace. And certainly, Dave, I hope you're feeling me on this, because I think that grace for self is a learned activity.
Right.
I'm quite sure. Yeah, I'm quite sure that grace for oneself is a learned activity. So think about that. Am I giving grace? Am I making room? Am I holding space for myself and my own process? And then, what about the people we love that we're close to? We often have the hardest time giving them grace, I've noticed. The people that we're closest to. We want them to be a certain way because we want it, or we want them to react a certain way. And, grace is just allowing someone to be who they are and where they are. Yeah, it's really an amazing experience. I had, I have a good friend. He's a musician that comes into Unity North Tampa. We've just become friends. And I felt like I was a receiver of his grace recently because I was very tired going into Sunday. It was just, I had not slept well the night before, and I had been fighting off some kind of bug, so I just felt a little depleted. And he comes up to me and he goes, man, I don't know how you do it. I thought you looked a little tired, and then you got up there and spoke and you just gave it everything. And I said, oh, thank you. And he goes, well, it ministered, and I just wanted to acknowledge it. And I said, well, I was tired. And I said, and as a friend of mine recently told me, evidently God doesn't care about that. God will just speak in and through. And he goes, well, he said, thank you. And somehow that felt like grace to me, because I didn't feel like I was doing my best. I did the best I could. I didn't feel like it was the best talk I had ever done. But for him, he was like, well, ministered to me. He said, I think most people feeling like you felt just would have not come in. And I said, oh, no, I was really guided. I can't imagine not coming in for not feeling good. I was thinking, my God, one time in New York, I did a talk when I had a temperature of 103. It was the best talk I'd ever given, I felt. I was the sub.
Do you remember much from it?
Not a word. Somebody said to me, well, why didn't you call in? I said, because I was the sub. It was like, 600 people sitting there. Where's the minister? Oh, she's backstage with a temperature. I just didn't feel like, anyway. So it felt like a little grace from my friend Aaron. He was just like, yeah, it ministered to me. And I was like, oh, so it was like a little bit different than I'm talking about, but it was like some kind of blessing somehow. There was like some spaciousness for me in what he shared. And I have to say, there's a little bit of humility in receiving grace and maybe a little vulnerability. It's like, I was tired. And the fact that he could hear that and not go, well, why are you tired? Or, well, I've had that in church too,
Yeah.
Well, why are you tired? Are you not taking care of yourself? Or what wrong thoughts have you had to cause this condition?
Oh.
No, it was just like, yeah, I am tired. He goes, well, it just felt like I got a little grace there from the universe through him. It was just like, yeah. But I also was honest, like, yeah, I am tired. So to be a real recipient, and then, big hug, and then I could lift him up in prayer for something also. It's like I got to be human also. It just gave me grace to not have to do everything perfect. There's always a lot of pressure, and I'm sure many of you in your work, it doesn't matter if you're a minister or not, in your work, there's always, this idea of perfection. I'm sure, Dave, in the composition world, there's that, right? You have to do the perfect cue or you're not going to get hired.
Yeah, or you're not going to.
That's got to be a pressure.
Yeah, you're not going to get on TV, or you're not going to be able to support your family, or if it's performing arts, if you're on stage, you got to be perfect. But I mean, how many times you're a musician, you've performed. How many times have you come off stage feeling like, oh, that was horrible, and then somebody comes up and says, "Oh man, that really resonated
right, you really
with me."
Kicked it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. To me, that's grace. And to actively give it is pretty miraculous. To actively intend on being a space for grace, and that's what I've been doing. Is there was a special friend that I felt like was really needing my grace. And I realized to give her grace was giving me grace also. That's what I mean. It's like the gift that keeps on giving once you get into that heart space. Because what I realized is like, and I just got to this last night in my own journey, it's like being in a state of grace is like instant forgiveness. It's like in that moment, releasing all expectation, loving, releasing all feelings of fear or anger or resentment or disappointment, that just gets erased, and I'm just present. I'm just present. And so it is in my view, tremendous act of love. I would even call it extravagant act of love. And so instead of that reaction in that space for grace, it's like you're sending love instead of expectation or feeling or reaction. That's grace to me. That's grace. It's like Jesus and the thief on the cross. Instead of saying, why did you do all those bad things? Why are you talking to me now in my suffering? No, grace right here, right now. Just extravagant grace, extravagant love. It's like grace is love, forgiveness, acceptance. It's all that in one kind of intention. And, the word grace, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. When we were little, we had a grace we said before every meal. And Dave, you grew up in the church. I assume, Did you guys say grace?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a certain one you said, or did people?
The only one that's coming to mind right now is the one we used in youth group, which was like rub-a-dub-dub. Thanks for the grub. Yay, God. That's the only one.
There's another one. Good food, good meat, good God. Let's eat.
Yeah. But it's something along the lines of, God, thank you for the food and bless the hands that prepared it. Bless this food and bless the hands that prepared it. Yeah. Of course, my mom's name was Grace too. So.
Oh, yes. Yep. Yes. Well, interesting. All the uses of the word. Well, again, the etymology of the word was really hearkening back to when you had a good crop, you were graced, And so when you were giving thanks at the dinner table, it was like acknowledging that source of good. And again, in our fast-paced culture, it's easy to move past grace and just go, oh, thank you, God, or even not that. Just, hey, let's just eat.
Or I deserve this, or,
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So my son and I have several routines, around the house. And we usually, when we have people over, we do a little bit more grace, only because we're trying to be present to our guests. And even though we say grace when it's just us as well, but it creates a whole different energy to start the meal. And the one we said growing up it goes like this: come, Lord Jesus, our guest to be, and bless this food bestowed by thee. Amen. And it got to where when I was little, we said it so fast, I didn't even know what we were saying. When I was really little,
sounds.
Come, Lord Jesus, it gives me, amen. It's so funny. And we said it my whole life. And I don't know, my mom was I think she was 88 or 89. We had a big family get together, and we all said grace, and we would, we were like, oh my God, we'd start crying and everything. And because it was so special to hear how many people, 30 people, which was just our immediate family, but with all the kids, like one of my siblings had 7 kids, we'd just all be there. And we got to the end, all of us kids are crying, right? Because it's our kids and our grandkids are saying, anyway, we get to the end, we're all crying, and my mom goes, well, you do know we could say a new blessing. She goes, my God, we've said it for 80 years.
Gosh. Your mom was great.
We were all verklempt, saying how special it was and everything. And my mom goes, well, you do know we don't have to only say this one. We could say a new one.
That's not why we're crying, Mom.
That's not why we're crying. Yeah, exactly. But, to this day, many of my siblings have it like cross-stitched and in their kitchens or by their dining table, that prayer. So friends, today is about simply bringing more grace into our lives and in the world. And so if saying grace before a meal is the way you do it, what a wonderful addition to your home and to your family. And, I always say, try it out. Don't believe me, try it out and see, bring in a little grace. Before you have that cup of coffee in the morning, grace for this, gratitude for this, gratitude for that I have it, that I can afford it, that I'm drinking it, that, it's my black medicine that's going to get me through the day,
Yeah, I think, as long as you're not coming from like this dogmatic kind of place, like, oh, you got to do it, otherwise the food won't be blessed. That's
right.
And I think for me, just kind of coming out of like organized denominational, evangelical
right.
religion.
Mm-hmm.
that like I don't remember the last time Shannon and I like said grace before a meal, because it triggered all that kind of the dogma of having to do it, you know.
Yes.
So, but it's worth revisiting though.
It's worth revisiting again. It's because it is from a different place. It's moved for me from a have to a want to.
Yeah.
You know, and as I've seen my son recently, he's gotten real involved in leadership and International Youth of Unity, and it's been really amazing and, quite frankly, rewarding to hear some of the things he's saying. As a 16-year-old, it reignited me in some of my practices. So my son's inspiring me. It's like, you know, for so many years you're doing it yourself and I'm the one teaching everything and I'm the, you know, so it's really been inspiring to have somebody around me just give this pure understanding and living some of these principles I'm talking about. It's been really inspiring. So yeah, it's from a new place, not a have to, but a what if this were a blessing in my life? You know, and you know, it doesn't have to be a rote blessing like "Come, Lord Jesus," our guest to be. You know, there was another one too. I was trying to think of, and I can't. There was one other one that we used to say as well. It was quite lengthy, but of course we memorized it. But you know, to this day, saying that blessing has a meaning, as I mentioned, right? Saying that blessing, even though it was just what we did, it became rote. Today, it has a great deal of meaning, and that's what discipline will do for you. Yeah. It will have you bring it back in a time when you most need. So there may be a new tradition you create. It may be a private tradition. You don't have to tell everybody around you, oh, by the way, I'm practicing grace today. you know, they'll know it, they'll feel it, they'll experience it, and you will shift energetically. And it's actually, to be a giver of grace, I've discovered, is a real freeing place to be, because it's your choice and it takes you into a higher state of consciousness. It takes you into spaciousness, into peace in a different way. It helps you release expectations of others and stay in the higher consciousness. So my friend, this is my prayer for you. This is my hope for you, that you make a space for grace in your life. And I do have a little song that I wrote, Dave, called Space for Grace. I wrote it with my friend Aaron, I was just mentioning. And I'd written part of it and sent it to him and said, well, it's kind of a little chorus. Can you add to it? And he wrote a middle section. So it's kind of an ABA form. But I love it. So I'm going to try to give it to you, Dave, an audio file, and you can drop it in. Yep. At the end of the show. But friends, thank you for joining us today. And again, in Toledo, Ohio, we're sending you our love and blessings, wishing you all the best, and happy and honored that we're supporting your journey. And thank you for all the ways you give, friends. We are going to be starting a campaign next week, another $9,000 in 90 days. So we thank you for all your support. We look forward to seeing you next week, and blessings on the journey, dear friend.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2023, Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission from RR Hot Publishing. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.